Gentlemen, I've had a couple of conversations about whether or not we should even talk about this first story, how we should handle this first story, how much hot water are we going to get if we talk about this first story. But at the end of the day, we decided that it would be goofy if we just completely ignored it. So we're going to talk about it right up front here. So, if YouTube shuts us down, at least we didn't have to do a full episode. So we'll see what happens. So it's been more than 2 years since the greatest attack on democracy in modern history. Actually, in history period. Mm-hmm. And now, in an effort to downplay this historical event, Tucker Carlson released previously unseen footage of that fateful day for people to watch. And not just, people that are capable of comprehending the impact of that event or just the footage that they're seeing, but to people like you and me who can't comprehend what we're watching and might stupidly take away conclusions that might suggest that this event wasn't the biggest attack on democracy than 9/11 or Pearl Harbor or the discontinuation of the McRib all combined. So, how recklessly, why would he do something like this? This is obviously trying to jeopardize all freedom from top to bottom, all of it. So, Justin, I'm going to start with you on this one. You were the one that brought this to my attention. And you're probably the only one on this podcast that can describe the new footage in a way that is accurate and won't get us kicked off YouTube. So,
wow.
Can you
accurate too? Yeesh, yikes!
Can you describe
Jim's face? Big time.
Can you describe what this new footage shows and how it impacts the official narrative of January 6th?
What the video footage shows, very plainly, video footage that had been withheld from the public deliberately. By people who had access to it in our government, public servants who are supposed to be accountable to the people, both on the right and the left, or I should say Republicans and Democrats alike did this. What the video footage clearly shows is that there were certain people, there were a great number of people who went through the Capitol building during this January 6th riot that really didn't do much other than just walk through the building and take selfies and look at things. In many cases, they did it in a very organized fashion. There was one video clip, one of my favorite video clips, was of a gentleman I think he had a MAGA hat on, who saw a pile of papers, like handouts and stuff on a table, and he went over and neatened them up, made them nice and pretty before he walked past them. I thought that was pretty funny. And a great number of people, the vast majority of people, did this. The other thing that it shows, so I say that to contrast it with the narrative that the vast majority of people who were there were destroying property and threatening to kill people, etc. The other thing that it shows that's really striking is that some of the more prominent figures of this whole thing, in particular the so-called QAnon shaman, who everyone has seen pictures of. That's the crazy guy without a shirt on, and he's got like a Viking hat on or something like that.
He's in our intro video for this podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
He's my spirit animal. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. That animal, that guy, he was, what the video clips very clearly show is that he and others were essentially escorted through the Capitol building by police who had many opportunities to arrest him because he was a insurrectionist who was trying to destroy the United States of America, supposedly. And yet, instead of arresting him, chose to walk him politely throughout the building, tried to open doors to the Senate chambers to get him in. When that didn't work, they tried other doors to get him in. They escorted him around. They were so kind to him that at one point, video footage shows, when the QAnon shaman got into, I believe, the Senate chambers, he actually made a special prayer thanking the Capitol Police for allowing them into the building and helping them walk around, etc. All this caught on videotape. Now, that QAnon shaman, by the way, went to prison for 4 years. He's still in prison, obviously. 4 years is his sentence. So what I think the biggest takeaway, and of course, Jim and Chris might disagree with me, but I think the the two biggest takeaways for me is, number one, something we already kind of knew, has been very clearly confirmed, and that is that it was not, although lots of people were in the Capitol who shouldn't have been in the Capitol, a lot of bad things happened in the Capitol that shouldn't have happened, although I would argue the whole event should never have occurred. It was clearly not an insurrection. Clearly. And this shows that at least the vast majority of people were not involved in an insurrection. There's just no way you could make that argument based on what we're seeing. The other thing that I think it really plainly shows is that not only the media deliberately did not tell us the truth about what happened, much of the media, that actually we expect, but both Republicans and Democrats alike deliberately withheld this information from the public this happened years ago now at this point. And they for 2 years, they withheld this from the public and did not give us a chance.
Like yesterday to me.
I know it does, but they did not give us a chance to draw our own conclusions. They didn't just say, here's the evidence, draw your conclusions. They said, here's the evidence, it was an insurrection, and then they only gave us select clips, and then they played them over and over and over and over and over again to give people the impression that something was happening, when and I'm not saying none of that happened. A lot of bad stuff happened. No one should have been in the Capitol. I fully get that. But was it the worst insurrectionist moment in American history since the Civil War, as we've been told over and over and over again? Clearly not. The head of this was literally walked through taking a tour from Capitol Police throughout the Capitol building. They were trying to get him into Senate chambers and other places for reasons that I think we really should find out. Why were they doing that exactly? All of that very important, but I think those were the two biggest takeaways for me. So really, I would love for us to be able to have a wider discussion about everything surrounding the motivations for why this happened and everything. But unfortunately, this platform does not allow for that kind of discussion.
Right.
We're trying very hard to avoid the rest of those parts of the story.
I agree with Justin's take, but I'm going to take this one step further. I've actually watched Tucker Carlson the past couple of nights in which he has, laid out all this evidence, and I've, watched the interviews and everything. And what stood out to me the most, and which I think is the most frightening, is the fact that the government refused to provide this video evidence to the lawyers who were defending these people. And a lot of this evidence was exculpatory. So they had the QAnon shaman's lawyer on Tucker last night, and he was never given any of this video evidence, and this would have presumably changed the course of the trial. And let's not forget that there are still hundreds of people who are languishing in the DC gulag who have not even gone to trial yet. And once again, the powers that be were holding this back. And the January 6th committee in particular refused to give this to the lawyers and to the other agents of the court who had every right in the world under our Constitution, under due process and everything. This is discovery. This is like, I think this is so much greater than the media covering this up. This is about our United States government, attacking people who went into the House of Representatives, and yes, they did some bad things, and yes, some of them broke some windows. I'm not condoning that whatsoever, but the vast majority, including many of those who have already been sentenced to years in prison, they didn't do anything, and the video evidence was right there all along. And for whatever reason, the FBI and the Capitol Hill Police and the January 6th committee refused, even though it was even though it is against the law, to not provide that discovery. So not only did the lawyer for this gentleman say that this is going to lead to obviously an appeal, and he thinks that this will overturn his sentence, but this calls into question the entire thing, because never forget that the FBI went out on a massive manhunt, sans any evidence, and just did a huge dragnet and caught up all these people who even just stepped foot or even use cell phone data to know that they were in the premises, whatever. So I think this is far greater than a media cover-up. This is our government, actually defying the Constitution and locking people up without due process. I think that must be stated.
So just one real quick thing. I think it's a fantastic point. Totally agree with it. However, one quick thing. They did do something. You said they did nothing. They did break the law. They shouldn't have been there. That was illegal what they did. So they did do something, but the punishment should fit that crime, not the crime of, insurrection or some other kind of thing. That's something along those lines.
Well,
anyway, I want to make that clear.
Totally agree with that. But I also, in the context of 2020 riots, how come all the people who were,
fair point,
who were, blowing up, federal courthouses, how come they never, got sentenced to 4 years in prison? How come those charges were just completely dropped? So, I know this is far broader and bigger than the conversation we're having today, but we have a two-tier justice system, and that is terrible for the country. And that means that a lot of people are losing faith in the institutions.
Yeah. So Jim, I like I kind of mentioned at the beginning of this, I had a few conversations with different people about like how we should talk about this, whether or not we should talk about this, whether or not Republicans should just move on. And I was the one arguing that like this whole thing, if both sides wanted to move on, like, oh yeah, this is terrible. Those people that did these things should be punished. All right, we're moving on. Then fine. Yeah. Why are we dragging all this up again? But like, because this has been used for years now as being like proof that MAGA Republicans and Republicans in general are just like a bunch of insurrectionists, yes. And they're not fit to even have a say in the way our country goes or whatever. And this is absolute proof of it. I feel like this new footage should be shown and that we should talk about it. And I've seen a lot of the response in the media to this is being like, "Oh, this is Tucker Carlson selectively editing," and it's just like, even if that were the case. Like, we have been shown the selective editing, footage since day one, and we've been forced to watch it through all the mainstream media and all of this. So it's like now we're finally getting some other piece of the puzzle. It's like, doesn't it just seem so contradictory, for these people to say, "Oh no, it's all selectively edited."
Yeah. I mean, well, the gaslighting on this has been instantaneous. I mean, Chuck Schumer came out the day after on Tuesday morning on the floor of the Senate. By the way, you can say anything you want on the floor of the Senate and you will not be, you're immune from any libel or slander laws, which is why Harry Reid famously got away with saying that Mitt Romney didn't pay any federal income taxes from the Florida Senate. And he knew he was lying. He did it on purpose. And when Mitt Romney lost the election, he says, well, he lost, didn't he? And so that's the kind of people that are senators. But Chuck Schumer, again, with the gaslighting, he said on the floor of the Senate, he said Tucker said that it was not a violent insurrection. That's false. If you watched any of these clips, and I don't have Fox News, I watched clips of it on YouTube and Twitter and other places. Tucker said it was not a, quote, deadly insurrection. And he played clip after clip after clip of Democrat politicians and our corrupt media calling it a deadly insurrection. Over and over and over again. There is a big difference between a violent incident or a violent, even if you want to call it insurrection, and a deadly insurrection. And so Chuck Schumer knows that he's lying and is doing it on purpose, and nobody seems to care. We should also remember, this is from Daniel Flynn in the American Spectator. He noted, and I'd forgotten about this, that the articles of impeachment against the former president, Donald Trump, claim that Trump supporters, quote, killed law enforcement personnel by their, quote, deadly and seditious acts. The New York Times reported, quote, pro-Trump supporters attacked the citadel of democracy, overpowered Brian Sicknick, 42, and struck him in the head with a fire extinguisher, according to two law enforcement officials. With a bloody gash in his head, Mr. Sicknick was rushed to the hospital and placed on life support. Obviously, that never happened. Never happened. And as Tucker Carlson pointed out in these reports, the New York Times is basically the assignment editor for the national, even international news, especially on a story as big as this. To this day, there is still that story up on the New York Times website with the headline that says, I just lost the headline. Oh yeah, here it is. He dreamed of being a police officer, then was killed by a pro-Trump mob. And the only difference in the original story, which was a lie, and the current story, which is on there and is also a lie, is there's a vague note at the top that says new information has emerged that, quote, questions the cause of Sicknick's death. No, It is not just some vague new information. Brian Sicknick was not. There was not a single officer killed at the Capitol. So, some were injured. A lot more actually were injured at a different riot across from the White House, put on by the left, that nobody ever talks about. And again, Trump pointed that out. But look, the reason this matters, myself, the people on this podcast, the people listening to this podcast, know that the January 6th quote committee was a joke, that the hearings, what came out of the hearings, was a joke and were lies. And Tucker Carlson, and Kevin McCarthy, who gave Tucker Carlson access to these tapes, has done the nation a great service for anybody who wishes to pay attention to it. And that is that we are being propagandized by our media and by our government about what actually happened on January 6th. You can condemn, as we did. We actually did a podcast the day after. It was on January 7th, 2021. And I remember you guys were sending me texts as I was doing something else the day before. You guys see what's going on at the Capitol riot? Can you believe this stuff? And I was like, I have a hard time getting all worked up about that. I mean, it's terrible, but I have a hard time getting worked up about it after a summer of cities burning to the ground and no accountability. And in fact, even at the time, the vice presidential nominee for the Democratic Party offering to give bail to these people who are rioting and destroying our cities. So yeah, I had a hard time getting upset about that. And I still have a hard time getting upset about it now. But the reason it's important to push back on this is that because the left and the Democrats have created this narrative, and they need this narrative, that it wasn't just a mere riot, that it was a deadly insurrection, that it was sedition, that it was an attempted coup, and that this was the greatest threat to the Republic since the Civil War. Karine Jean-Pierre said that yesterday. And is it absurd? But they need this. They need that the people that committed these acts on that day at the Capitol are a quote threat to our democracy. Why do they need this? Because that allows them to do what they've done, frankly, since the beginning of the Biden administration, which is to treat everybody who opposes this regime, whether strongly or even mildly, as somehow a threat to the country. Conservatives who show up at school board meetings. This is how far this has gone. Conservatives who show up at school board meetings objecting to the sexualization of their third graders have FBI files put out on them, because that is a threat to democracy. They're trying to paint everybody who opposes Joe Biden, everybody who supported the election of Donald Trump, as a threat to democracy. That's why they are doing this, and that's why Tucker Carlson showing these tapes that give real context to what happened that day is being pushed back on so strongly by guys like Schumer and our media and all the rest. And, we're still divided down the middle in this country. There are people who actually understand what's going on, and there are people who are lied to and believe the crap that they get from our corrupt legacy media.
Yeah,
unfortunately, Donnie, just real quick. Unfortunately, it's not even just Chuck Schumer. It's Mitch McConnell too. Mitch McConnell came out, and a bunch of Republicans too. So this is not just Democrats. This is the uniparty. This is the deep state. This is permanent Washington. Pushing back and pushing this propaganda and these lies.
Yeah. So two things. One is, the media response to Tucker Carlson is uniform, and that he's trying to downplay what happened on January 6th by showing this footage. And I was just like, the opposite side of that coin. If by not showing this footage, you're upplaying it. So you can't have it both ways. You could be in favor of showing all of it to show the whole picture. But if you're only showing one side, you're downplaying it. That means, by definition, by only showing the other side, you're upplaying it. That's the point that I think is like most important.
Another thing that Tucker showed, and I think this is really important, is there have been a lot of questions about possible FBI informants and Ray Epps, and he's gotten a lot of press here. Tucker showed that Ray Epps, who said under oath to the January 6th committee that he had left the Capitol right after the initial breach. They have him on tape at like 2:50 in the afternoon. This is hours later, and he's still there trying to get people to go in. So there's a lot of questions that are still unanswered. And Donnie, the best thing is to put all the video out there and let us come to conclusions and let us get to the truth. Let us get to the bottom of this. But people like Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and Merrick Garland and President Biden and Karine Jean-Pierre, they don't want that at all. They want to keep the narrative that they peddled after this going as long as possible. And this is a direct threat to that.
And one other thing that I really want to mention, okay, is because I don't want to be like, free them all, no charges for anybody, because I'll still stand behind all of the things that I said 2.5 years ago or whenever this happened, that like the people that did break the law should be held accountable. I understand the protest nature of it, but actions do have consequences and you still have to be held accountable. So I'm not going to give everyone a free pass for this. If I was the person that was like in charge of the protesters, I would have said, no, don't break the windows and go in. Like, don't do it. Like, you're just giving the left like unlimited ammunition to paint you as insurrectionists for the next decade. But
look, two things can be true at the same time: that the people who assaulted police officers and caused vandalism at the Capitol should face criminal charges for those things, and the QAnon shaman Jacob Chansley is completely railroaded and needs to be released from prison right now. I mean, I actually looked up his sentencing document, and the judge did not see this information. He was portrayed by the prosecutor as a violent insurrectionist when it's clear he was given a guided tour of the Senate side of the Capitol by the police department. He even was walked by a bunch of other cops. One of them was just looking at his phone as he calmly walks by. The prosecutors described him as holding a spear. And we showed the picture earlier. And yeah, there's a often on a flagpole, there's a spear at the end. And they portrayed that as him having violent intent and trying to stab people with it. It's like it's commonly on top of a flagpole. And so this whole thing is a complete farce. And the fact that he is going to be languishing in prison, they gave him credit for time served, most of which was in solitary confinement, which this government considers torture if done by other countries for no reason. And there are hundreds of, as Chris said, there are hundreds of people being held still before and without trial. No bail given to them. People, first-time offenders for parading or parading around the Capitol. They sent SWAT teams to break down the doors of people who because their cell phones pinged at the Capitol on that day. This is a complete travesty. They're actually, I would like to, I almost don't want to say this, but it'd be nice if there was a second round of January 6th hearings, but this time examining what really happened and the abuse of our government going after people who were peaceably assembling. Can you even imagine sicking the federal government on BLM organizers and Antifa organizers and rioters in this country? It's inconceivable because those people work for the regime. They don't work against the regime like freedom loving people do.
Justin, there's a bit on SNL where there's like a talk show and they have guests on and they never get to the third guest because of all of the stuff that happens earlier in the show. And I really feel like we're getting towards that when it comes to this topic of this article that you published on Fox. But we'll get to it. I promise, Justin.
I'm not going to talk about this anymore. I'm already too upset.
Justin, I'll give you final words. Clear up. Justin's like our he did some law school, so he's our like resident lawyer when it comes to this. He has to clear up any misconceptions or misstatements or anything. So Justin, I'll give you final word on this topic, and then I promise we'll go to your the main topic.
Yeah, I would say I generally I agree with almost everything that's been said here. I think that the only thing that, and I think more so, and Donnie, I mean, you said this, I think this is important that we make it clear that, all crimes should be, not punished to the greatest extent possible. But if you commit a crime, you should be held accountable for it. And everybody who walked through that Capitol building, right, even if it's in protest, that's part of the protest. You and I have talked about this many times. That's one of the reasons why protesting matters, is because if you're protesting and you have to go to jail for it or face some fine or some consequence, that's part of the sacrifice you're making as a result of doing this. So I don't think they should have been there. I don't even think Trump should have held the rally that he held because of the situation was too contentious. And everyone who went through that building, I think, should face some kind of penalty. But do I think they should be treated as insurrectionists? No, definitely not. They should be treated like anyone who's trespassing would be treated in any other kind of similar situation. And so I think that's really the core of the issue, is how this whole thing has been framed. But I will say this, to some extent, and I know there's a lot of people, don't want to hear this, but to some extent, what did you think was going to happen when you walked into that building? Did you think that everybody on the left wouldn't use this to their advantage? Did you think that the media wouldn't run with this and think this is the greatest thing of all time? Did anybody think that this was somehow going to help them? I mean, it was say what you want about what they did and the morality of it just generally, it was a stupid thing to do. because every single person who walked through that building, or the vast majority of them, want something different than what ended up coming from walking through that building. And they were all wrong. And as a result of it, I think you could argue this past election was largely driven by what happened here. I think that lots of bad press has occurred because of Donald Trump's political career. Maybe could be destroyed. Maybe he probably would have been the runaway Republican pick had this not happened. And now maybe he's not. We don't know. But I think that part of it, regardless of whether they've been treated badly or how the media portrayed it or how the government reacted to it, lots of important issues, but they shouldn't have done it at the very least because it betrayed their own cause. It was a stupid thing to do. And at the very least, I think we should be able to acknowledge that this was bad for conservatism. It just was.
I'm glad that Chris and Jim didn't jump in to have a bone to pick with anything. So fantastic, guys. Fantastic. We're growing.